for whatever reason, whenever there's a genuine issue at hand, whether we're talking climate crisis, whether we're talking education or gambling reform, the Australian Parliament does nothing. And yet all of a sudden, towards the end of this year, they've been very excited to rush through a number of programs which just seem to dismantle the society in which we live. And the one that I'm going to discuss now, and that is particularly messy and just dumbfounding, is the social media ban. Yes, is there a problem with the current way that a lot of social media platforms are set up? Absolutely. But is the solution just to ban every single person under the age of 16 from accessing the internet? No. It's not technically banning access to the internet, but where do you think people get their sources of information from? Everything I ever actively pursued outside the failing education system was through the internet, was through social media, people I could contact about my art form, about my craft, to learn about different ways of doing things and learning about the world. Like, the biggest thing that's apparent with this is that they have absolutely no plan. For one, they have no idea which platforms that they are going to ban, and they have no idea how they're actually going to implement this ban in the first place. And they're like, okay, so we're going to rush through this thing, make sure no one can critique it, but it's not actually going to get implemented for 12 months, and we have no idea how it's actually going to get implemented. Like, what? Even the BBC was saying that France tried to implement a similar policy last year, banning kids without parental consent accessing social media under the ages of 15. And guess what? They just used a VPN to get around it, as everyone does. If you look at any VPN sponsor online sponsoring any social media creator today, they always talk about, wow, you can get around geo-blocking so you can access your favorite TV shows. Guess what? That can be implemented to anything else. So not only are they rushing a policy through that won't take effect for a year anyway, that they have no idea how they're actually going to implement any of the things on what platforms, but it just won't work. They're not even solving the problem, they're just delaying it. So rather than someone learning from a young age to be responsible and how to use these technologies that will impact every facet of their life, they're just going to be thrown in the deep end once they do turn 16, assuming the ban actually works. I remember reading something ages ago that was talking about how kids who start catching public transport from a younger age have a better awareness of the world around them. They're better able to assess risks from the street. Because if you're locked in a car your entire childhood and always driven to school, at what point are you actually forced into a situation where you have to judge who's a dodgy character, who's going to be there to protect you if you need someone? So you have to introduce kids to these systems in a very safe way. It's the same thing with like playgrounds. Having dangerous playgrounds is important. If playgrounds are too safe, kids don't learn risk. And once again, danger needs to be regulated. Danger needs to be enough that they can learn risks and benefits and all of that. But they still need to be introduced to that level of risk, or at least to the systems that will govern a lot of their life down the line. I did see recently, which is actually a pretty good idea, is that some schools are using certain programs to help teach kids about recognizing disinformation and scams. And that's the sort of stuff we need. Getting people from a young age being able to recognize what's trying to steal their money, what's trying to screw them, and what's actually genuine. So that's a good move. Additionally, there have been some implementations, but there could be much, much stricter regulation on how these platforms operate. Cool. You want kids on your platform? You still want your kids to be able to, message their friends and learn about the world. Sure. But you got to remove algorithms, depending on the case, or at least highly regulate them, and just add extra protections, like some things that have been implemented in the past, like, you can't message people that you're not directly friends with, or you can't get requests from people you're not mutuals with someone else. And these sorts of protections that basically allow these platforms to be pure messengers and ways for kids to be able to connect with each other and learn about science and the world around them, which is the whole point and why it's so essential that these platforms, in at least some form, remain. I was listening to Colin and Samir's interview with Dude Perfect the other day, and they kept reiterating about the platform that they created that has got 2 million downloads. And the whole focus of it being, can we give a platform that parents can hand to their kids and feel 100% safe in knowing that their kids are getting a safe experience, whether it be education, whether it be entertainment, that this is going to be a family-friendly experience. And that's what YouTube Kids is, and that's what these platforms need to design more of. Not a blanket-wide ban, but a way that kids can still get access to learning, still get access to entertainment, but there's not going to be like Nazi material popping up halfway through. Half the way I've been able to keep in contact with my friends that have moved overseas and done a range of things is because of social media. You can keep up to date with what they're doing. But if that's wiped out, you'll lose all of that. Back onto like how they're going to actually implement any of this, because they have made it very clear they don't actually know which platforms they're going to ban, which ones they're going to keep. I know YouTube sent me an email specifically, and I know probably many other creators who are in Australia basically talking about how they made a loose promise to YouTube that they might consider letting them through. It's like, what? Once again, you're just passing legislation without knowing anything about it. And then about how it's going to be implemented. What, now you have to have ID laws to access the internet? Just imagine how bad that is going to be. For one, you have the aspects of like data leaks and privacy breaches. Not good. That happens enough in society. We don't need another opportunity for that to occur. But two, if you need an ID to access the internet, think of how badly that can be misused. Sure, you may trust the government of today. What about the government of tomorrow that can be like, no, sorry, people with blonde hair can't access the internet. No, sorry, if you're a brunette, you can't watch sport content. That's the most tame PG example, but just extrapolate that to any other minority group. It's a very quick downward slope to tyranny. And I'm not saying this is exactly what it will wield, because generally things are tamer than we eventually predict. But it is a step in that pathway. That is how it could be misused with the wrong sorts of governments and regulations in place. The best thing I had about turning 18 wasn't the fact that, wow, you go to a pub and drink. It was the lack of restrictions. It was the fact that before you're 18, you're so bound by certain rules and legislations that are in place to inhibit you doing certain actions. And yes, some of that's protections or whatever. But the ability now where you could just like sign up for stuff, you could do stuff without constantly needing parental approval or just being outright banned because you were under 18. I was lucky that a lot of the opportunities that I had growing up, in terms of maybe work opportunities, working with great people, they kind of turned a blind eye to the fact that I was like 17 years old. Because probably they should have, well, they probably actually did need parental approval before working with me, but they were willing to just do it because I came across as much older, I came across as much more mature. But that's the problem with having these blanket bans, no, you can't do this at this certain age, is you remove that ability for people to take their own initiative, for people to have responsibility in what they're doing. Take advantage of opportunities that are laid out ahead of them, whether that be, once again, actually doing something working or just educational as a whole. Me, and I'm sure all of your friends when you had Instagram back in the day, absolutely lied about your age, while I was just posting like shit memes and like artworks that I'd created. I was 11, I was 12, I absolutely said I was over the age of 13. Then by the time you got 15, then you changed it back again, and they're like, hold on a second, you lied. But of course they don't care. The point being, everyone will always find a way around it. It's just meaningless to try and implement in the first place. You just create underground markets where then these sorts of communications and interactions with the world will occur. If you push people to use a VPN to now based out of, I don't know, India, let's say, then all of a sudden you're relying on Indian regulation about how you want, Australians to use their content. Where if you just say, hey, we're going to regulate these platforms in a way that hopefully can benefit these kids by providing the most education, information, whatever it may be, then you can control those environments and make sure it breeds the best next generation possible, rather than being susceptible to Cayman Islands VPN, by being susceptible to the Dominican Republic's VPN. Whatever is the choice that day. Like, to this day, I'm still skeptical of birthdays on Facebook because I'm still so used and so ingrained in my head that everyone had a fake birthday. And I realize now that they're all real. But back in the day, everyone lied. They say they'll give these platforms like a $50 million fine if they don't comply. And for one, $50 million is nothing. It's pathetic. Fines don't work, and I discussed that in a previous video. It's just for optics. It's just to make them win some votes from some parents and caregivers going to the next election, even if it will just make things worse. It doesn't solve the iPad kid problem. Parents will still give their kids a device, now just on the adult setting, if, hypothetically YouTube Kids is banned, and then there won't be any of the protections that there once were. I'm not saying trust these platforms, regulate the shit out of them, but actually regulate them. Don't just outright ban them where now it's a free-for-all. If they actually cared about kids, they would do things based on the tens of climate strikes that have occurred with millions of Australian kids around the country. They would actually do something about reducing university debt rather than vaguely promising if they win the next election they may or may not do anything. They tried to say recently, wow, look, we reduced the amount of interest rates student has to pay on university debt. It's like, okay, cool, I'm now paying 4% instead of 7%? So instead of punching me with a closed fist, you're now just slapping me with an open hand. Wow. So generous. So you cut maybe $1,000 off my student debt, but 3 months before I got in, you increased my student debt by $25,000. Thanks, bro, I guess. But this all comes back to the fact of how much of a mess this policy is. The fact that it was implemented today, and they don't know what it will ban, how it will work, but they pass the legislation anyway while not actually caring about implementing changes that genuinely help the kids in the problems they're currently facing. Why not use these platforms for good? Why not allow kids to explore the world and become better versions of themselves? Outright ban will not do this. And it's been rushed through so quickly, there hasn't been a time to be able to give any sort of valid criticism towards these policies. Yet when there's things that actually need to be changed, like the largest petition in Australian history for the Murdoch Royal Petition, guess what? Nothing's happened about that, and that was years ago. And to reiterate, the climate crisis, the student debt crisis, the lack of money being earned from fossil fuels that is burning the planet, in which we will grow up into and are forced to face the consequences of. If you actually want to help kids, actually help kids. Not trying to do this dumb shit to win a couple of votes when you could actually be implemented policies that genuinely help the next generation and will buy a lot of favour for you coming to the next election, not these vague promises of dangling a half-eaten carrot in front of us.